Good afternoon, everyone. Tammy Golden, your OMBA president. With me today, I have our residential committee, Tammy Stehman with Caliber Home Loans. She's the area sales manager there, and Kelsey Staats with WFG in business development. And our guest, Matt Markee, who is the OMBA lobbyist down in Salem. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Hi, I thought it would be a good use of our time today to pick Matt's brain and find out what's happening in Salem. I think there's a lot of timely topics, and it's a great time to just get an update. So Matt, I know that you and I and the rest of the board members talk on a regular basis, but what can you share with our membership on some recent updates from Salem?
Sure, happy to. So just starting since the pandemic has started, we've obviously been in this state of flux. We had a complete kind of stay home, save lives, essential business lockdown, if you will. Things are starting to reopen in Oregon. There's been a lot of political divide on how that should happen. Just today, the governor talked a little bit about in a press conference of phase 2. And while Multnomah County hasn't even entered phase 1 yet, all of the other counties are in phase 1, and 31 of them are actually eligible on Friday to enter into phase 2, assuming their applications are approved. With phase 2, you're going to see more things open as far as businesses and those types of things. You're going to see, for example, bowling alleys and larger public gatherings, that sort of thing. How our legislature has been handling this outside of the governor is really trying to look at a bunch of different policy issues. What should be done? How do we fix our budget? How do we fill in budget holes so that we're not cutting everything as much as what our current budget forecasts look like? And really, we have a pretty substantial loss of revenue to our state budget as businesses have closed down. And we're now really trying to focus on how to start looking at just filling those holes, what kind of cuts we need to make, and moving on. At the same time, this is an election year, and we certainly our current makeup of our legislature is pretty more on the progressive side, where you have Democrats in a supermajority in both the House and the Senate. There's going to be a lot of key elections come this November. We just got through a primary that kind of sets everything in place for next November as far as who's running against who. And certainly the Republicans are trying to pick up several seats of interest to you guys or to your organization. There is one candidate on the South Coast who is a former OMBA president that is running in that Senate seat there that stems from the Tillamook area all the way down through the South Coast, down past Coos Bay. So just to highlight that, it's going to be a hotly contested race, and certainly could decide whether or not our Senate is under a Democratic supermajority or not, depending on what happens other places. But it's a very key race. So that's kind of,
I'm glad you brought up the snapshot. Oh, go ahead.
No, it was just a snapshot of kind of where things currently are and what's happening. It's super chaotic and super busy from my end.
Anything that happened in the most recent election that affects OMBA and its members?
As far as the primary itself, there certainly are some races that, are either Republican safe seats in November at the general election or Democratic safe seats that were contested in the primary. So some of those we're going to see, we already know who the winner in November is going to be just because of the makeup of that particular district at the legislative level. Interestingly enough, not in some of the Democratic races, I think it was interesting that not always did the most progressive person win, and there was a handful of Democratic kind of districts, if you will, where some of the more moderate candidates won, or at least in my opinion. That will be interesting to see how that dynamic changes or doesn't change the Democratic caucus going into next year. The other big race that really in the primary was a statewide race at the Secretary of State's level, where you had Shemia Fagan, current state senator, running against State Senator Mark Hass. It was a close election, and on election night, nobody actually knew who won. Senator Fagan ended up winning that. She faces a Republican Senator Thatcher in the general election. It will be a close race. Certainly a Republican won this last time it was up at a statewide level, but probably it's just going to be interesting to watch. And the more progressive candidate won in the primary on the Democratic side, and how that plays into the general. Not that the Secretary of State's office necessarily has a lot of say over mortgage banking, for instance, but it does run or will run our electronic or remote notary types of situations as well. So how that is implemented could have some effect there.
Great update. Another topic that I know has been something everyone's been concerned about is foreclosure updates, whether that's regarding both the renters and the commercial space. Can you give us an update on what you're hearing on those two pieces?
Yeah, and so, right now, as far as timing, the legislature is looking at going into special session, most likely. My best guess right now is going to be, towards the end of June, maybe the last week of June. How that plays out is a little still unknown as far as policy issues, certainly foreclosures, both on the residential and on the commercial side is a topic that is being discussed. The governor is also looking at an executive order potentially still on foreclosures on the commercial side. As far as evictions go, we certainly have the current executive orders that are in place. How those get expanded, and they likely will get expanded or at least lengthened at the state level through legislation just to extend the time period of them to kind of say we are in agreement with the governor. I think those are all in play for that special session. There certainly is going to be some debate between the Republicans and the Democrats as far as how that plays out and negotiations back and forth. There was a hearing here just last week in the House Business Committee talking about foreclosures. The Attorney General came in, really talked about our mediation program and our current system that we have in place from our last real economic downturn when we had a lot of foreclosures. I think legislators who are not involved with that several years ago are now starting to understand better what our mediation program looks like and looking at ways to, while we can put a moratorium on foreclosures, that's kind of a Band-Aid on the approach, if you will, as far as what to do with consumers. But is there a way to update or make our current modification program at the state level better and making sure we have counselors available and those types of things? I think all of those will be discussed. We've had a lot of discussions just with the governor's office around different executive orders in this area. And we still could see one, particularly on the commercial side.
Perfect, thank you. I know it's a really important topic for so many.
The other thing, the other piece in there is a little bit of discussion around credit reporting, more so on the renter's side, and looking to make sure the Speaker's office would really like to make sure that there is no negative credit reporting on a residential renter. And that is how it's kind of spelled out really specifically, just no negative credit reporting for renters. Certainly the CARES Act at the federal level talks about how to do credit reporting and different types of coding that should be used and things like that when agreements are met. So seeing how that plays out is still a little yet to be seen here at the state level because the federal government has handled so much of it. There is some preemption and things like that with state government, but it's certainly being discussed.
Fabulous, thank you. I think with that, the next topic that probably comes up is in so many of our minds on the mortgage side of things, it's forbearance.
Yeah, and that really kind of plays into the foreclosure issue. Certainly the federal government has done some things on the forbearance side, trying to educate state legislators on what that means, how it plays out, what the options are for consumers has been a little bit of a challenge, just making sure that people understand what that whole system looks like. And while I am not saying I am an expert on the federal system, certainly my specialty is on the state legislative side of things and how policy is shaped and worked there. And advocating on your behalf at the state level. Certainly MBA has been super involved in the forbearance issue. I think it kind of crosses over though to the state issue. And as these timelines for forbearance come up and people are still unable to make payments, if that's the case, how they reach agreements as far as making payments that have been missed, payment plans, all those types of things are really trying to be now focused at the state level to say, what do we do? Is there a way to make sure that these folks aren't just kicked out of their homes? One of the things, in fact, I think our emergency board on Friday is going to meet in our emergency board. For those that don't know, is kind of like a committee that meets outside of our legislative sessions that really is allowed to do some budget work and things like that. They're trying to handle some of the CARES Act money that goes to our state. They're looking at some possible money as high as I've seen, as high as $75 million into some funds to help with both renter assistance as well as mortgage assistance, so that people that qualify under those current programs would have money available to help make payments. There's a lot of talk of trying to make sure that those payments are given directly to either the landlord and or mortgage company, so that if a consumer is qualifying and getting that money for those specific things, that's what it's actually spent on. So I think there are some things in place trying to make sure that mortgage companies are made whole and those types of scenarios, but it's really all of these things, unfortunately, is changing on a daily basis as we learn more from what the federal government is doing. It then shapes what our state is thinking, and as the federal government changes their opinions, we have to then adapt and kind of change our opinion too. But I do think on Friday, or soon, if not Friday, we're going to see some additional monies flow into those kind of mortgage assistance and renters assistance types of programs to help with, not necessarily directly with forbearance, but trying to keep people as current as they can on mortgages and things like that.
Tammy, you're representing the lending space here today, so do you have input on the forbearance piece as well?
Well, I just would add, I think what's going to get really interesting is for the, larger servicers who are dealing with, states having different sets of rules and regulations and how they're going to, handle the whole forbearance piece and the loan modification. So I think that it'll just be, it's going to be interesting to see how that all pans out. So hearing Matt's, update kind of on what the state of Oregon is looking at, I think is very interesting. As we know, basically the as far as how forbearance is working now with the GSEs, basically they have stated that they will purchase loans that have gone into forbearance, which the old rule was that they were, not eligible for sale or purchase if a loan had gone into forbearance, and they need to be current at the time of sale. That's been temporarily modified, that purchases and limited cash out refinance transactions, so long as they're not more than 1 month delinquent at the time of sale or securitization, those are eligible. So, there's still a huge hit to pricing for those, 500, 700 basis points, which is a huge blow to servicers, but it's, better than the, selling them scratch and dent, so to speak. So there is some relief, but it'll just be interesting, like I said, to continue to hear more how each state reacts. So I don't know if there's anything more specific that I could add to regarding the forbearance piece. I think that what we know about the credit reporting at this point is that when borrowers go into forbearance, they will not be negatively reported to the credit agencies for 3 months. They can apply again for a second 3 months for a total of 6 months. But so long as they come out of the situation, they've fulfilled their agreement, whatever it is, that modification at the end of that period of time, they will not be reported negatively to the agencies. However, if they don't complete their plan successfully, they will be reported late back from their original date of missed payment. So.
Fabulous, thank you. I think one piece that you mentioned on that is interesting is the state level of things. And Matt, you had mentioned earlier about Ron, remote notary, the mobile notary piece, and how we're trying to tackle that and the updates that's there. And obviously Kelsey representing the title space of things, I think is probably a great subject to broach at this time.
Yeah, I mean, if you could speak on that from the state level, I think that would be good. I know that just like Tammy was talking about, as far as the national um, adaption to it versus the state adaption to it is all different. And so I think that if you could talk about maybe just Oregon's piece in that, and if you do know about more, you know, on the national level as how those two are going to, you know, coincide together, that would be really helpful for us.
Yeah, certainly. So this is an issue that I've been working on for quite some time, probably over a year now. And our Oregon Law Commission has actually set a work group task force in place that has been with a lot of stakeholders that's been reviewing this for the last, I don't know, 9 or 10 months at least. But we were hopeful that this last February, when the legislature was in session, the issue would be addressed. It didn't ultimately get addressed, and frankly, there wasn't a lot of legislation that passed in February anyway, because as there were walkouts and different things like that, the session really just had an abrupt end. As we entered the pandemic, the Secretary of State's office and other folks, I think, really realized the importance of needing to be able to do remote notary as we locked down our communities, and there just wasn't this contact like we're used to between people. For the longest time, I think the Secretary of State's office thought they could do some kind of temporary emergency rules to put something in place. We certainly were in communications with them around how that should look, how it should work, and those kinds of things. Ultimately, the Secretary of State's office, I think in consultation with the Attorney General and others, kind of decided, you know what, I don't think we have the authority to actually do something in administrative rulemaking proceedings. It then went to the governor's office. The governor's office was actually going to then look at an executive order as far as can we do something through that mechanism to put in place a remote notary. That again, they really kind of came up to the same conclusion that they just didn't have the authority. And it really was kind of, you know, days before they were looking to actually issue something when it was determined they didn't have the authority to do something. So that kind of put us in this spot where we didn't know what to do. And really our only option at this point at the state level is to do something in our special session and try to pass legislation. So certainly in all of the draft legislation so far that we have seen for our special session, if and when it ever happens, this is the issue. This issue will come up, and really, I think the legislation, which we have shared with your legislative committee and your board, I think it's been tested and looked at through by different stakeholders, from the title companies to financial institutions to consumers to the Secretary of State's office, and everybody's kind of vetted it pretty well, I think, as far as what it should look like and how it should work. How that interacts with other states and things like that. I think, you know, there are a couple of different models nationwide on how states should handle this, trying to make sure that everybody complies with each other. I think what Oregon is looking at complies pretty well with everything that's in the marketplace today as far as how to do these, the different types of vendors that are out there to issue remote notaries. I think we will interact well with other states. Whether or not the federal government actually does something that would preempt somehow over the top of all of this, I think is a little unknown, but hopefully when we go into special session here in the next few weeks, assuming that happens, we'll have something in place pretty quickly that if it needs modifications after the fact, could certainly be done next year during the legislative session as well.
Thank you.
What is timely topic? I just saw a stat yesterday that said 81% of lenders are either actively or aggressively trying to seek a solution for this. So I'm sure we'll be revisiting it very soon.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I mean, I represent a wide variety of clients, and I will tell you that notary is a big deal to a lot of different industries out there, not just mortgage. It's something that people, I don't think, ever really realized how much they rely on until it was gone, or until it was, I shouldn't say it's gone, but it's just harder to do under these circumstances. So people are really focusing on trying to come up with a solution in a timely manner. In fact, this morning, the Senate Judiciary Committee, who had a virtual interim committee hearing, this was on their topic, and they had one of the vendors come in and do a demonstration virtually as far as how it works and things like that. And so I think, you know, people have discussed it in the legislature enough that they understand it now. They understand why it needs to happen, and that there are things in place to make sure that people aren't taken advantage of and things like that during the process.
Great. So when will we know the dates, if and when the special session is going to happen?
Yeah, I would love to tell you the answer to that. It's very difficult. And as we have this budget hole that we have to deal with, we have some reserve funds that we could plug some of those holes with. But also there's a lot of talk about whether or not the federal government is going to do something as far as helping states out on a financial basis. Certainly there's been a lot of CARES Act money that's gone to states that have been really more dedicated to certain types of programs or how to spend, whether that's at the local government level or at the state level. It's really kind of dealt more directly with the pandemic. There's some talk that maybe the federal government has some solutions for just helping with loss of revenue due to the pandemic itself. So I think there's been this kind of wait and see game at the legislature here in Oregon trying to say, if the federal government is going to come out with some money for us, how does that change how we fix our budget? And so where many people thought we may have had a special session, a month ago or 6 weeks ago, it's really been pushed off. But we're on a fiscal year of July 1. We do a biennial budget. So July 1 is the start of our second half of the biennium. It's a time, if you're going to make budget cuts, that it makes sense to make them right at the start of the fiscal year. The longer you wait, the higher on a percentage basis your budget cuts are. So right now on a biennial basis, we're kind of at about an 8.5% budget cut. But you take all of that in the second half of the biennium, and now you're at 17%. And as you close that to even a shorter time period before the end of biennium, that definitely continues to raise as far as your percentage look on your budget cut. So I'm really hopeful, and I think we're going to see something, the last week of June. But it's really hard to say when that might get set in stone. There are other people that, have said we need to have something by the end of summer. And certainly I think that is true. If we don't do something before July 1, getting something done in July or August is much better, in my opinion, than doing something in, October or November. We could have a scenario too where we do more than one special session where we come in and fix our budget legislatively speaking, and then come back in with some other policy tweaks and things like that later in the interim. If we don't have special session, the governor can do through the executive branch can do across the board cuts, but they literally are across the board to our general fund, and you can't really prioritize one program over another. So that's why I think we'll do this at the legislative level. It's just a matter of figuring out when.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Matt, for your time today. As you and everyone at OMBA knows, we couldn't do what we do without you. So we truly appreciate your time today. It sounds like this could be an ongoing conversation. And if everybody likes this type of dialogue, we will ask for some feedback and have you back again very soon with more questions, if you don't mind.
That would be great. Look forward to it.
Yeah, and thanks to our residential committee, both Tammy and Kelsey. Appreciate your time today. Thank you so very much for representing OMBA and still working very hard and diligently to get our members together for some great content. And we'll keep bringing you more information as we have it. Thanks, everyone.